I never believed one text message could destroy your life. Until I sent one to the wrong number at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. The reply came through in seconds, and the words made my blood run cold. 12 hours later, I watched from my window as 5 black cars pulled up outside my building, their engines purring like predators. When the door of the center car opened and he stepped out, tall, dark-suited, with eyes so blue they cut through 3 stories of brick and glass to find mine. I understood that some mistakes don't just embarrass you, they change everything. Welcome back to Mafia Folklore. Before this story begins, tell me something. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? It helps us know how far the legend of the Mafia travels tonight. Now, let's begin. The November wind rattled my bay windows like it was trying to get in, making the old brownstone creak and settle the way it always did on Friday nights. I loved that sound. It made my 3rd-floor Lincoln Park apartment feel alive, like the building was tucking itself in for the evening right alongside me. I sat curled up on my oversized sectional, my laptop balanced on one knee, a half-empty bottle of Pinot Grigio sweating on the coffee table. The vintage Edison bulbs I'd strung above the couch bathed everything in warm amber light, softening the exposed brick walls and making the whole space feel like a cocoon against the cold city outside. Through the windows, I could see the glow of streetlights on Cleveland Avenue, hear the distant hum of Halsted Street, cars passing, people laughing as they headed to bars. The pulse of a Chicago Friday night I wasn't part of. My phone buzzed. Another text from Jake. I picked it up, already rolling my eyes before I even read it. Still on for tomorrow night? Jake, the investment banker from Tinder. 3 weeks of the most aggressively boring dates I'd ever suffered through. Nice enough guy, tall, decent jawline, the kind of attractive that came from a gym membership and expensive hair product. But God, listening to him talk about portfolio diversification made me want to throw myself into Lake Michigan. My best friend Rachel had been pushing me to just have fun with it ever since my last relationship imploded 6 months ago. Not everyone has to be your soulmate, Em, she'd said over brunch last Sunday. Sometimes a hot guy who pays for dinner is enough. But Jake wasn't even hot enough to make up for being boring. I reached for my wine glass, the Pinot loosening something reckless in my chest. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was 3 weeks of pretending I was interested in tax-advantaged investment strategies. Maybe I was just tired of playing it safe with men who felt like beige wallpaper. I picked up my phone and typed, "Only if you promise to be less of a gentleman this time. I'm thinking we skip dinner and you show me what those hands can do besides shuffle stock portfolios." My thumb hovered over the send button for half a heartbeat. Then I hit it. There. That should wake him up from his personality coma. I poured myself another glass, queuing up my favorite playlist and settling deeper into the cushions. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life one by one, painting the last autumn leaves in gold. I'd lived here 2 years now, and I still got that little flutter every time I looked around. The high ceilings, the brick, the bay windows overlooking tree-lined streets. It was mine. I'd worked my ass off at the marketing agency to afford it, and it was worth every late night and difficult client. My phone buzzed. That was fast. Maybe Jake had more game than I'd given him credit for. My heart stopped. The wine glass froze halfway to my lips. My entire body went cold. Interesting proposition, but I don't do business with people I haven't met. Who is this? That wasn't Jake's voice. That wasn't Jake's casual tone or his predictable emoji usage or anything remotely Jake-like. My hands started shaking as I clicked on the contact. The number stared back at me, one digit off from Jake's, one single, devastating, life-destroying digit. "Oh, God!" The words came out as a whisper. "Oh, God! Oh, God! Oh, God!" I scrolled up frantically. There was nothing else in the conversation thread. Just my mortifyingly explicit text message sitting there like a bomb I'd accidentally armed and thrown into a stranger's life. My face burned hot enough to heat the entire apartment. My chest tightened. This was fine. This was just some random person in Chicago. The city had 2.7 million people. He'd laugh it off. I'd die of embarrassment, and we'd both move on with our lives and never think about it again. My fingers trembled as I typed. "I am so sorry. Wrong number. Please delete that and forget you ever saw it." I'm completely mortified. I hit send and immediately pressed the phone to my chest, squeezing my eyes shut. Please just let this go. Please just be a normal person who... The phone buzzed against my sternum. 3 dots. He was typing. The response came through. "I don't delete anything, Dolcezza, and I never forget." The Italian endearment made something cold slither down my spine. Another message. "But I'm curious now. Were you planning to follow through with this offer?" There was something in the way he wrote it. Something that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not anger. Not even offense. Just interest. Controlled, calculated interest that felt predatory. "It wasn't meant for you," I typed back, trying to sound firm even though my hands were shaking. "Again, I apologize for the confusion. Have a good night." I stared at the screen, willing him to just let it go. The wind picked up outside, howling through the narrow spaces between buildings. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm went off and then died. 3 dots appeared. "Tell me your name." I set the phone down like it had burned me. No, absolutely not. I wasn't giving my name to some stranger I'd accidentally sent explicit texts to. That was how people ended up on true crime podcasts. I didn't respond. A minute passed, then another. Maybe he'd gotten bored. Maybe he'd... The phone rang. The sound shattered the quiet of my apartment like a gunshot. The number on the screen was his. I stared at it, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I reached out with a trembling hand and answered. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Emily Parker." His voice was deep, smooth, with an accent that curled around the edges of certain words. Italian-American, probably 2nd or 3rd generation. 28 years old. Works at Morrison Marketing on West Wacker Drive. Lives at 2347 North Cleveland Avenue, apartment 3B. Should I continue? The blood drained from my face. "How did you..." "Your number is attached to your social media, Kara. Your privacy settings aren't as tight as you think." He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "You have very nice taste in apartments, by the way. Those bay windows must have beautiful light in the morning." I stood up so fast the wine glass tipped over, red spreading across my coffee table like blood. I rushed to the windows, pressing myself against the wall beside them, heart racing. Was he outside? Was he watching me right now? "Who are you?" I whispered. "Someone who appreciates honesty." There was a smile in his voice, dark amusement. "And you were very honest in your message, Emily. Refreshingly so." "This isn't funny. You need to leave me alone." "I will." A pause. "After we meet." "We're not meeting. I'm not..." Tomorrow, noon. I'll send a car for you. I'm not getting in any car with... Yes, you will. His voice dropped lower, and there was steel beneath the silk now. Because you're curious, because you want to know who you sent that text to, and because... He trailed off. The silence stretched. Because what? I hated that I asked. Because I'm giving you a choice, Emily. You can wait for me to come to you, or you can come to me. But either way, we're going to meet. I prefer to do this civilly. My throat closed up. Is that a threat? It's a promise. His tone softened slightly. Noon tomorrow. Wear something comfortable. And Emily? What? Sleep well tonight. It might be your last peaceful night for a while. The line went dead. I stood there in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence. Outside, the city continued on. Cars passing, voices distant, the L train rattling somewhere in the distance. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But I didn't feel safe anymore. I checked every lock on my door twice. Drew all the curtains, sat on my couch with my laptop open to 911 just in case. The wine sat abandoned on the table, red staining the wood like evidence at a crime scene. Who was he? I pulled up Google with shaking hands and searched the number. Nothing. Tried reverse lookup sites. Nothing. Of course there was nothing. Someone who could find my address that fast wouldn't have a public phone number. The hours crawled by. Every sound in the building made me jump. Every car passing outside made my heart race. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, just sat there watching the windows, waiting for something I couldn't name. When dawn finally came, gray and cold through the curtains, I was exhausted but wired. I'd convinced myself a dozen times to call the police. But what would I say? A man I'd accidentally sent a sexual text to wanted to meet me? They'd laugh me out of the station. By 11 a.m., I'd talked myself into believing he was bluffing, some creep getting his kicks from scaring women. He wouldn't actually send a car. He wouldn't actually... At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. They're outside! I rushed to the window, my breath fogging the glass. 5 black cars sat idling at the curb below. Not just any cars, sleek, expensive sedans with tinted windows that reflected the gray November sky. The kind of cars that didn't belong in my neighborhood. The kind that made people cross to the other side of the street. As I watched, frozen, the back door of the center car opened. He stepped out. The first thing I saw were his eyes. Crystal blue, so vivid they looked unnatural even from 3 stories up. They found my window immediately, like he'd known exactly where to look. The second thing I noticed was how devastatingly handsome he was. Tall, at least 6'3", broad shoulders in a perfectly tailored black suit, dark hair slightly longer than conventional, pushed back from a face that could have been carved from marble. He looked up at me, those impossible blue eyes holding mine across the distance. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who always got what he wanted. My phone buzzed again. Come down, Emily, or I'll come up. Your choice. I stood there, my reflection ghost pale in the window glass, and realized that my quiet, careful, boring life had just ended, and I had no one to blame but myself. Have you ever made a mistake that changed everything? A text sent to the wrong person, words you can't take back, a choice that shifted your entire world? Tell us in the comments what happened. I couldn't move. My feet felt welded to the floor. My hand pressed against the cold window glass as I stared down at him. At those 5 cars. At the way pedestrians on Cleveland Avenue suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. My phone buzzed again. I'm a patient man, Emily. But I'm also parked illegally. The Chicago PD tends to look the other way for me, but I'd rather not test that courtesy today. That snapped me out of my paralysis. My hands shook as I grabbed my purse, my keys, my phone. I caught my reflection in the mirror by the door. Pale, wild-eyed, still wearing the same jeans and sweater I'd thrown on this morning when I'd finally given up on sleep. My hair was in a messy knot at the base of my neck. No makeup. I looked exactly like what I was. Terrified. The stairs felt endless. Each step echoed in the old building, and I counted them like a condemned woman counting seconds. 23 steps to the second floor. 23 more to the first. My hand on the brass doorknob of the building's entrance was slick with sweat. I could still turn around. Call 911. Barricade myself in my apartment until... The door opened before I could touch it. A man stood there. Not him. Someone else. Older, maybe 50, with silver threading through dark hair and a face that had seen things I couldn't imagine. He wore a black suit like a uniform. His eyes were kind, but there was no mistaking what he was. Miss Parker. His voice was surprisingly gentle. If you'll come with me. It wasn't a question. I stepped out into the November cold. The wind bit through my thin sweater, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and exhaust, and something else. Expensive cologne, leather, danger. The 5 cars formed a barrier on the street, their engines running, exhaust curling into the gray air like smoke signals. He stood beside the center car. Up close, he was even more devastating. The pictures my mind had tried to construct during the long, sleepless night hadn't come close. He was tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, and those eyes, God, those eyes were inhuman. Crystal blue like glacial ice, framed by dark lashes that should have softened his face, but somehow made him more dangerous. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His dark hair was pushed back carelessly, like he'd run his fingers through it, and a small scar cut through his left eyebrow. He was beautiful the way a blade was beautiful, sharp, deadly, mesmerizing. Emily. My name in his voice sounded different, intimate, like he'd already claimed it. Thank you for being reasonable. Did I have a choice? My voice came out steadier than I felt. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. There's always a choice, Kara. You chose to come down instead of making me come up. I appreciate that. The older man opened the car door. The interior was black leather, expensive and pristine. I didn't move. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere we can talk properly. He gestured to the car. Please, I promise you'll be safe. Forgive me if I don't find that reassuring, considering you tracked down my address from a wrong number text. Something flickered in those blue eyes. Surprise, maybe, or approval. You have a spine? Good. I was hoping for that. Answer my question. Where are we going? My restaurant. Valentini's on Rush Street. Ever heard of it? I had. Everyone in Chicago had heard of Valentini's, the kind of place that required reservations 3 months in advance, where senators and celebrities and people with serious money went to be seen. Or to not be seen, depending on which private room they were shown to. And if I refuse? He stepped closer. Not threatening, exactly, but I felt the shift in the air between us. He smelled like cedar and something darker, more complex. His voice dropped lower, meant just for me despite the 4 other men standing at attention around us. Then I'll be disappointed. And trust me, Emily, disappointing me is something you want to avoid. He paused, and those blue eyes searched my face. But more than that, You'll disappoint yourself because you're curious. You want to know who I am, what I am. Why a wrong number text brought 5 cars to your door. He was right, and I hated him for it. I got in the car. He slid in beside me, and suddenly the spacious interior felt small. The door closed with a solid thunk that sounded like finality, like a cage locking. The older man took the front passenger seat, and another man I hadn't noticed drove. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, the other 4 cars falling into formation around us like a motorcade. We drove in silence through Lincoln Park. I watched my neighborhood slide past the tinted windows, the coffee shop where I got my morning latte, the boutique where I'd bought the dress hanging unworn in my closet, the park where I jogged on Sunday mornings. My life, looking suddenly small and far away. Marco Valentini. His voice broke the silence. Since you'll want to Google me the moment you get a chance. I turned to look at him. He was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Am I supposed to recognize that name? Most people do. No arrogance in his tone, just fact. My family's been in Chicago for 4 generations. We have interests throughout the city. Interests. I kept my voice flat. That's a nice euphemism. His mouth curved again, and this time it was definitely a smile. I like you, Emily Parker. You're not falling apart. Most people would be. Trust me, I'm falling apart. I'm just doing it quietly. He laughed. A real laugh, low and genuine, and the sound did something strange to my chest. Made something warm unfurl despite the fear. We crossed into River North, the city transforming around us. Sleeker buildings, more glass and steel. Restaurants with names I recognized from food magazines. The car slowed as we turned onto Rush Street, pulling up in front of a building that looked like it had been transplanted from Florence. Honey-colored stone, arched windows, understated elegance that screamed old money. Valentini's. The door opened. Marco stepped out first, then offered me his hand. I stared at it. Strong fingers, scarred knuckles that told stories I probably didn't want to hear. A single gold signet ring on his right hand. I took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, and he held on a beat longer than necessary as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The touch sent electricity up my arm, and from the way his eyes darkened slightly, he felt it too. The restaurant's entrance was discreet, a heavy wooden door with a brass handle polished to a mirror shine. A man in a suit stood beside it, and he pulled it open the moment he saw Marco approaching. No words exchanged, just a slight nod of acknowledgement. Inside, the restaurant was dimmer, warmer. Afternoon light filtered through those arched windows, painting everything in gold. The main dining room was elegant without being ostentatious. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, the quiet murmur of lunch conversations. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. It smelled like garlic and wine and fresh bread. Every eye in the room turned to Marco. Then they turned away, quickly, deliberately. Like looking too long would be dangerous. We walked through the dining room, and it parted for us like water. Staff materialized and disappeared. Diners suddenly became very interested in their food. Marco's hand found the small of my back, guiding me, and the heat of his palm burned through my thin sweater. We passed through an archway at the back, down a hallway lined with old photographs, black and white images of Chicago from another era, men in fedoras, women in furs. At the end of the hall, a door. Marco opened it. The private room was beautiful, smaller than I expected, intimate even. A single table set for 2 beneath a chandelier that cast prisms across cream-colored walls. A fireplace crackled in the corner despite it being barely afternoon. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a courtyard garden, somehow green and alive even in November. "Sit," Marco said softly, pulling out a chair. I sat because my legs were shaking. He took the seat across from me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, we were alone. No cars, no men in suits, no curious eyes. Just him and me and the fire crackling, and my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. A server appeared as if summoned by telepathy. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes. She poured water, set down bread that was still warm, then disappeared without a word. Marco leaned back in his chair, those blue eyes studying me like I was a puzzle he was taking apart, piece by piece. "You're wondering if you should be afraid." It wasn't a question. I reached for my water glass just to have something to do with my hands. "Should I be? Of me? No?" He paused. "Of the situation you found yourself in? Perhaps?" That's not reassuring. I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to be honest. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and suddenly he was close enough that I could see flecks of darker blue in his irises. "Tell me something. Emily, that text you sent, the man it was meant for. Do you care about him?" The question caught me off guard. What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me. I thought about Jake, about 3 weeks of boring conversation and careful politeness." "No, not really. He was just someone to pass time with." "Then you were settling?" Not a question, a statement. Playing it safe with someone who didn't make you feel anything real. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't I?" He tilted his head, and that small smile returned. "Emily Parker, 28, marketing professional who's good at her job but bored by it. Lives alone because you value independence, but secretly worries it's just loneliness. Dates men who are safe because the alternative, feeling something real, terrifies you." My breath caught. "You got all that from my LinkedIn profile?" "I got that from the way you walked down those stairs. From the fact that you got in this car even though you were afraid. From the way you're sitting across from me right now, terrified but refusing to show it." He leaned closer. "You're done playing it safe, Emily. The moment you sent that text, the moment fate put my number in your phone instead of his, everything changed." "This isn't fate. This is a mistake." "Is it?" His voice dropped lower, intimate, and I felt it in my bones. "Or maybe the universe decided you needed something more than another boring banker who'd waste your fire on stock portfolios." I should have been angry, should have stood up and demanded he take me home. But instead, I found myself asking, "What do you want from me?" Marco's eyes held mine, and for a moment, I saw something flicker there. Vulnerability, maybe, or longing, gone so fast, I might have imagined it. "Dinner," he said finally. "Tonight, a proper one, where we get to know each other without all this." He gestured vaguely at the room, the situation, the absurdity of it all. "No cars, no fear, just you and me and conversation. Then, if you want to walk away after, you can. I won't stop you. And if I say no right now, then I'll have you driven home and you'll never hear from me again." He said it simply, like it cost him nothing, but his jaw was tight and his hands on the table had curled into loose fists. "But I think you'll say yes." "Why would I do that?" "Because you felt it too. When I helped you out of the car. When our eyes met through your window this morning. When my voice comes through your phone." He leaned back, giving me space, but his eyes never left mine. Because for the first time in a long time, you feel something other than bored. He was right. God help me, he was right. I should have run. Should have said no and never looked back. But instead, I heard myself say, "One dinner, then I walk away, and this ends." That smile again, slow and devastating. "One dinner, Kara. That's all I'm asking." The fire crackled. Outside, clouds shifted, and sunlight suddenly poured through the windows, turning everything gold. Marco lifted his water glass. "To accidents." I lifted mine, and our glasses touched with a soft clink that sounded like a door closing or opening. I wasn't sure which. Would you say yes to dinner with someone like this? Dangerous, intense, someone who sees straight through you? Or would you walk away while you still could? Tell us what you do in the comments. I spent the rest of Saturday in a fog. Marco had one of his men drive me home, not the older gentleman from the morning, but a younger guy who didn't say a word the entire drive back to Lincoln Park. I'd climbed those 23 steps twice, let myself into my apartment, and stood in the middle of my living room trying to convince myself that what had just happened was real. The wine stain was still on my coffee table. Evidence that last night had actually occurred, that I'd actually sent that text, answered that call, gotten into those cars, that I'd said yes to dinner with Marco Valentini. I Googled him the moment I set my purse down. My hands were still shaking. The search results were extensive and terrifying. Marco Valentini, 35, head of the Valentini family, 4th generation Chicago. Business interests that the articles danced around with carefully neutral language. Philanthropist, the Tribune called him. He donated millions to children's hospitals, art museums, restoration projects in Italian-American neighborhoods. But between those lines, in the careful way journalists phrase things, I could read what they weren't saying. He was mafia, not allegedly, not rumored to be. He was. There were photos, him at charity galas in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car, shaking hands with the mayor. Him at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a community center, surrounded by grateful families. Him leaving a courthouse, his lawyer beside him, charges dismissed. Always those blue eyes, always that controlled expression that gave nothing away. I should have been terrified. I was terrified. But I was also something else. Something that made me open my closet and stare at the dresses hanging there, wondering what you wore to dinner with a man who could probably make you disappear with a phone call. At 6 p.m., my phone buzzed. "The car will be there at 7. Wear something you feel beautiful in. M." My heart did something complicated in my chest. He'd signed it, like we were already familiar, like this was already something. I chose a dress I'd bought on impulse 3 months ago and never worn. Deep burgundy, fitted but not tight, with a neckline that hinted without revealing. I actually put on makeup, which I rarely did. Loose waves in my hair instead of the messy bun. Heels that made my legs look longer than they were. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like a woman going to meet her lover, not a woman who should be calling the FBI. The car arrived at 7 exactly. A different one this time, sleek and black, but less intimidating than the fleet from this morning. The older gentleman from earlier stood beside it. "Miss Parker?" He opened the door with a slight bow. "I'm Giovanni. I'll be driving you this evening." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Something about his kind eyes made this feel less like a kidnapping and more like I didn't know what. We drove through the city as the sun set, painting the skyline in shades of orange and pink. Not to Valentini's this time, but north, following the curve of Lakeshore Drive. The lake was choppy, gray-green and endless, whitecaps catching the last of the light. We passed the Gold Coast, past the marina where sailboats rocked at anchor, kept going until the city started to thin. Lake Forest. Of course, the houses got bigger, set farther back from the road, hidden behind walls and gates and old-growth trees. Money whispered here instead of shouting. Old money, the kind that had been here since before Chicago was even Chicago. We turned onto a private road, then through gates that opened as we approached. The driveway curved through manicured grounds, past gardens that were probably spectacular in summer. And then the house rose before us. Not a house, an estate. Limestone and glass, 3 stories, with a view of the lake that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Elegant, without being ostentatious. Powerful, without trying. Giovanni opened my door, and I stepped out into the cool evening air. It smelled different here, cleaner, with hints of lake water and pine and something flowering despite the November chill. "He's waiting for you in the garden," Giovanni said gently. "Through there." He pointed to a stone path that curved around the side of the house. I followed it on shaking legs. The path was lined with small lights that flickered like fireflies, guiding me past perfectly trimmed hedges and flower beds that somehow still had blooms. Around the corner, through an archway covered in climbing roses that had lost their leaves but kept their thorns. And there he was. Marco stood beside a table set for 2 in the middle of a courtyard garden. String lights had been woven through the trees overhead, creating a canopy of gold. Candles flickered on the table, their flames dancing in the breeze coming off the lake. A fire burned in a stone pit nearby, adding warmth to the cool evening. Music played softly from somewhere. Something classical and Italian that I didn't recognize but felt in my chest. He'd changed from the suit. Now he wore dark jeans and a black button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing those tattoos I'd read about. The Madonna and Child on his upper arm. The Roman columns and prowling lion winding down his forearm. The compass rose on the other arm with Italian script I couldn't read from this distance. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and the look that crossed his face made my breath catch. "Emily." My name again, but different this time. Softer, almost reverent. "You look—" He didn't finish. Just stared at me like I'd stolen his words. "Beautiful?" I supplied, trying to keep my voice light despite my racing heart. "You told me to wear something I felt beautiful in." I was going to say devastating. He crossed to me, and suddenly we were close enough that I could smell that cedar scent again, see the way the candlelight reflected in those impossible eyes. "But beautiful works too." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His muscles were solid beneath the fabric of his shirt, and the tattoos were even more intricate up close. Detailed shading, fine lines, art that had taken hours and probably hurt like hell. He pulled out my chair, waited until I was seated, then took his own seat across from me. The table was set with care. Real china, crystal wine glasses, silver that caught the candlelight. A bottle of wine was already open, breathing. "I should have asked if you like Italian food," Marco said, pouring the wine. "But I took a chance. You seem to take a lot of chances. Only with things that matter." He handed me a glass, and our fingers brushed. That electricity again, sharp and undeniable. "To new beginnings?" I clinked my glass against his, took a sip. It was incredible, rich and smooth, and probably cost more than my rent. "This is quite the setup for someone you just met." I wanted to do this right, No restaurant staff, no interruptions, just us. He set down his glass. Tell me something, Emily. Something real, not the LinkedIn version of yourself. I should have deflected. Should have kept the conversation surface level and safe. But something about the candlelight and the wine and the way he was looking at me made me honest. I'm lonely, I heard myself say. I have friends. I have a job I'm good at. I have my apartment that I love. But I'm lonely in a way that has nothing to do with being alone. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. Go on. Everyone I date is... I searched for the word. Insufficient. Not because they're bad people, but because I can tell in the first 5 minutes that they'll never really see me. That we'll have pleasant conversations, and pleasant sex, and pleasant everything, and I'll still be lonely. And Jake? His voice was careful. The man that text was meant for? Was the most recent in a long line of insufficient men. I took another sip of wine. I wasn't even attracted to him, not really. I just thought maybe I was being too picky. Maybe pleasant was enough. It's not. Marco leaned forward, candlelight catching the scar through his eyebrow. Pleasant is settling. Pleasant is slowly dying inside while pretending you're content. And you know this how? Because I've been lonely too. He said it simply, like it cost him nothing to admit. I have an empire. I have loyalty. I have people who would die for me. But I don't have anyone who knows me. Really knows me. Not the boss, not the name, not the reputation. Just me. The vulnerability in his voice stole my breath. This man who commanded 5 cars with a text, who made restaurants part like the Red Sea, who had the power to make people disappear, he was lonely. So this is what? I asked softly. 2 lonely people having dinner? This is 2 people being honest about what they want. His blue eyes held mine. I want someone who sees me, who isn't afraid of what I am, but isn't impressed by it either. Someone who'd tell me I'm being an ass when I am. Someone real. And you think I'm that person based on one accidental text? I think the way you walked down those stairs this morning took more courage than most people have in their entire lives. I think the fact that you're sitting here right now, knowing what I am, means you're braver than you give yourself credit for. He paused. And I think that text wasn't really about him. It was about you finally admitting you want something more than pleasant. He was right again, and it terrified me. A door opened somewhere behind me, and a woman appeared, elderly, with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded me of Giovanni's. She set plates in front of us without a word. Pasta that smelled like heaven, sauce that had probably simmered for hours, fresh bread still warm from the oven. My Nana's recipe, Marco said after she disappeared. She taught me to make it when I was 10. Said a man who couldn't feed the people he loved was no man at all. I took a bite. It was incredible. Layers of flavor, rich and complex, and made with obvious care. You made this? This afternoon, after you said yes to dinner. He smiled at my expression. What? You thought mob bosses couldn't cook? I thought mob bosses had people for that. I have people for a lot of things, but some things matter too much to delegate. His eyes found mine again. Like cooking for someone I want to know better. We ate, and we talked. Really talked. He told me about growing up in his family, about watching his father navigate the impossible balance between business and morality, about his mother, who died when he was 16, and how the Madonna tattoo on his arm was so he'd carry her with him always. About the compass rose, because she'd told him before she died that as long as he remembered where home was, he'd never truly be lost. I told him about my parents in Milwaukee, about choosing Chicago, because I needed space to figure out who I was without their expectations, about my best friend Rachel, who'd drag me to bars and insist I needed to put myself out there, about my job that paid well but left me feeling hollow, like I was selling pieces of my soul for accounts I didn't care about. "So quit," Marco said, like it was simple. "And do what? I have rent, student loans, a car payment. Do what makes you feel alive. Life's too short to waste it on things that don't matter." He refilled my wine glass. "What would you do if money wasn't a concern?" I'd never let myself really think about it, but the wine and the candlelight and his genuine interest made me answer. "Right, maybe. I used to love it in college. Stories, articles, anything, but it's not exactly a stable career path. Stability is overrated. Passion isn't," says the man who probably has more money than God. He laughed, and the sound did something warm and dangerous to my chest. Fair point. But money doesn't buy what matters. Trust me. The evening deepened around us. The candles burned lower. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, the lake whispered against the shore. We finished the pasta, and the kind woman brought out tiramisu that melted on my tongue. We drank more wine, and my head felt pleasantly fuzzy, my fears softening at the edges. Marco told me about his love of opera, about how his mother had taken him to the Lyric when he was young, and how he still went, alone in his private box, and let the music wash over him, about his collection of first edition books, about how reading was the only time his mind truly quieted, about his plans to restore entire blocks of the neighborhood where his family had first settled, to preserve that history before it disappeared. He wasn't what I'd expected. Wasn't the monster the news articles implied, or the cold boss I'd imagined. He was complicated, capable of violence, yes, I didn't doubt that, but also cultured, intelligent, surprisingly gentle when he talked about the things he loved, and the way he looked at me made me feel like the only person in the world. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, standing and offering his hand. "There's no music playing anymore. Then we'll make our own." He pulled out his phone, and a moment later, something slow and Italian filled the air. A woman's voice, achingly beautiful, singing about love and loss and longing. I took his hand. He pulled me close, one hand at my waist, the other holding mine against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat through his shirt. Steady, strong. We moved slowly, and I let my free hand rest on his shoulder, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric, the tension coiled in his body, even in this moment of softness. "What is she singing about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Fate," he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "About how some people are meant to find each other, no matter how impossible it seems. About how love finds you when you least expect it." "You believe in that? Fate?" I didn't, until a wrong number text landed in my phone at 11:47 on a Friday night. His hand tightened slightly at my waist, until I looked up at a window and saw the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen staring down at me with terror and defiance in her eyes. My breath caught. "Marco, I know this is insane. I know you should run from me. I know I'm the last thing you need in your life." He pulled back just enough to look at me, and those blue eyes were raw, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. "But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I read those words. Since I heard your voice. Since I saw you walk down those stairs even though you were afraid. This is crazy." I whispered. We just met. You're... I know what I am. His jaw tightened. I know what my life is. And I know I have no right to ask you to be part of it. But for the first time in 10 years, I feel something other than empty. And I think... He stopped, his throat working. I think you feel it too. I did. God help me, I did. The attraction? Yes. He was devastatingly handsome, and the way he looked at me made my skin burn. But it was more than that. It was the way he listened when I talked. The way he'd cooked for me with his own hands. The way his vulnerability felt like a gift, something precious he was trusting me with. The way being near him made me feel more alive than I had in years. One date, I said, my voice shaking. You said one date, and then I could walk away. I did say that. His eyes searched mine. Are you walking away? I should have. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to say yes. To get in Giovanni's car and go home and block his number and pretend this had never happened. Instead, I lifted my hand from his shoulder and touched his face. His skin was warm, the stubble along his jaw rough beneath my fingertips. That scar through his eyebrow was slightly raised, a reminder that his life wasn't soft or safe. No, I breathed. I'm not. Something flared in his eyes, relief and desire, and something deeper that made my stomach flip. His hand came up to cover mine against his face, and then he was leaning in, and I was rising on my toes to meet him, and... His phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the moment like glass. Marco closed his eyes, his jaw clenching, and I felt him war with himself. Answer it or ignore it. The boss or the man. I'm sorry, he said roughly, releasing me and pulling out the phone. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. I have to take this. He stepped away, the phone to his ear. What? Not a question, a demand. I couldn't hear the other end, but I watched his entire body language shift. The gentleman who'd cooked me dinner and told me about his mother vanished. In his place stood someone cold, controlled, dangerous. Handle it, he said, his voice like ice. I don't care how. Just handle it before it becomes a problem. A pause. No, not tonight, tomorrow. Another pause, and his eyes cut to me briefly, something like regret flickering there. Because I'm busy, that's why. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, his back to me, his shoulders tight. When he turned around, he'd composed himself, but I could see the effort it took. I'm sorry, he said again. That was your other life. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the fire. The one that involves problems that need to be handled. Yes. He didn't lie to me, didn't try to soften it. It's always there, Emily, even when I wish it wasn't, even when I'm with you. The reality of what I was doing crashed over me. This wasn't some romantic fantasy. This was real. He was real, and the world he lived in was dangerous in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Maybe this was a mistake, I said quietly. Maybe we both got caught up in something that doesn't make sense in the daylight. He crossed to me in 3 strides, and suddenly his hands were on my arms, his eyes boring into mine. Don't do that. Don't let fear make you a coward. I'm not being a coward. I'm being realistic. Realistic is safe. Realistic is another Jake who bores you to death. Realistic is waking up in 10 years and realizing you've been sleepwalking through your life. His grip tightened, not painful but desperate. I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking you to join my world. I'm asking you to give this Give us a chance to see what it could be. And if it's dangerous, then I'll keep you safe. With my last breath, I'll keep you safe. He said it like a vow, like a promise written in blood. But I won't lie to you. My life is complicated. There are parts of it that aren't pretty. But with you, his voice cracked slightly. With you, I feel like I could be more than what I am. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away. But my heart, that treacherous, reckless thing, was screaming louder. I'm scared, I whispered. Good. His thumbs stroked gentle circles on my arms. That means you're smart, but don't let fear choose for you. I looked up at him, this beautiful, dangerous, complicated man who'd cooked me dinner and told me about his mother and made me feel seen for the first time in forever. Who represented everything I should avoid and everything I'd been searching for. One more date, I heard myself say. Just one more. Then I decide. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, pure, genuine, transformative. One more date. I'll take it. He kissed my forehead, gentle and chaste, but the touch sent heat racing through my entire body. Come on, Giovanni will take you home before it gets too late. As we walked back toward the front of the house, his hand found mine. Our fingers intertwining like they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. I was in so much trouble, and I wasn't sure I cared. Have you ever felt that pull towards someone you knew you shouldn't want? That choice between playing it safe and taking a risk that could change everything? Tell us about it in the comments. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the risk. It's wondering what if. The second date happened 3 days later. 3 days during which I barely slept, barely ate, barely functioned at work. Rachel called twice, and I let both calls go to voicemail because I didn't know how to explain what was happening. How could I tell my best friend that I was falling for a man who'd tracked me down from a wrong number text? A man whose name appeared in news articles with words like alleged and investigation scattered throughout? Marco texted me every morning. Nothing demanding, nothing aggressive, just him. Tuesday morning. Hope your coffee is strong and your meetings are short. M. Wednesday morning. Saw something today that made me think of you. A woman yelling at a parking meter on Michigan Avenue. She had your energy. M. Thursday morning. Tonight, let me take you somewhere. Somewhere just ours. M. I'd said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Giovanni picked me up at 7, and this time, I was ready. Another dress, emerald green this time, because Marco had mentioned once during our dinner that green was his mother's favorite color. My hair down in waves. Makeup that took me an hour because my hands kept shaking. But we didn't go to his estate. We didn't go to Valentini's. Instead, Giovanni drove us deep into the city, to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Older buildings, narrow streets, the kind of place tourists never saw. He pulled up in front of what looked like an abandoned warehouse, brick and steel, and broken windows. My heart sank. This was it. This was where I learned I'd made a terrible mistake, where the fairy tale turned into a nightmare, where... Giovanni opened my door, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Don't worry, Miss Parker. Trust me. I followed him to a steel door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades, but when he pushed it, it swung smoothly, silently, and warm light spilled out. Inside was magic. The warehouse had been transformed. The walls were exposed brick, but clean, warm, covered in art. Street art, graffiti, vibrant murals that turned the industrial space into something alive. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling like stars. In the center of the massive space, a single table sat beneath a skylight, candles flickering, the Chicago night sky visible through the glass above. And Marco stood beside it, wearing jeans and a dark Henley, his tattoos on full display, looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. This is... I couldn't find words. Mine. He crossed to me, took my hand. This building, I bought it 5 years ago, planning to develop it into something. But I never could bring myself to change it. So instead, I kept it as it was, a place that's just mine, where I can think, where no one knows to look for me. He paused. You're the first person I've ever brought here. The weight of that statement settled over me. This wasn't just a date. This was him offering me something private, something sacred. Why me? I asked as he led me to the table. Because you're the first person I've wanted to share it with. He pulled out my chair. Because every other place in my life has expectations attached to it. But this place is free, and I wanted to be free with you tonight. We sat, and this time there was no staff, no Giovanni hovering nearby. Just us and the city visible through the skylight, and a cooler beside the table filled with food he'd obviously prepared himself. He pulled out containers, sandwiches from some deli that smelled incredible, pasta salad, fresh fruit, cheese and crackers, wine in plastic cups because there was no pretense here. This wasn't about impressing me. This was about being real. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Marco said after we'd eaten, after the wine had loosened my tongue and softened the edges of my fear. That's a dangerous question. I want the danger. I want the truth. His blue eyes were serious in the candlelight. I want to know you, Emily. Really know you. So I told him about how I'd been engaged once, right after college, about how I'd called it off 3 weeks before the wedding, because I'd looked at my fiancé and realized I didn't love him, not really, not the way you were supposed to love someone you'd spend your life with, about how everyone had called me crazy, told me I was throwing away something good, told me I'd regret it, about how I'd never regretted it for a second, but how it had made me careful, too careful. About how I'd spent 6 years choosing safe men because safe meant I'd never have to risk feeling that certainty again. The certainty that I was making a mistake. And now? Marco asked softly. What do you feel now? Terrified, I admitted. Because you're not safe, because being with you is the opposite of careful, because I barely know you, and yet I think about you constantly. I replay our conversations. I look at my phone hoping to see your name. I feel more alive when I'm near you than I have in years. I met his eyes. And that terrifies me more than anything else. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I was married once. I hadn't expected that. What happened? She died. He said it flatly, but I could see the pain beneath. 8 years ago, cancer. We'd been married for 2 years, and I watched her fade away over 6 months, watched her get smaller and weaker and more transparent until one day she just wasn't there anymore. Marco, I'm so sorry. Her name was Lucia, and she was good. Too good for me. Definitely too good for my world. But she loved me anyway. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. After she died, I promised myself I'd never let anyone that close again. Because losing her nearly destroyed me. Because the pain of loving someone and losing them was worse than anything I'd ever experienced. And I've experienced a lot. But, I prompted gently, But then a wrong number text showed up on my phone, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want to know someone, to care about someone's day, their thoughts, their fears. He reached across the table and took my hand. You make me want to risk it again, Emily. Even knowing what loss feels like. Even knowing my world could hurt you. You make me want to be brave enough to try. My eyes burned with tears. We're both terrified. Then let's be terrified together. His thumb stroked across my knuckles. Let's stop pretending we can control this. Let's just see where it goes. I was about to answer when his phone rang. Again. I saw the war on his face. Ignore it or answer it. But something in his expression told me this was different from last time. This was serious. I'm sorry, he said, releasing my hand and standing. I have to. I know. Take it. He stepped away into the shadows of the warehouse, but his voice carried in the empty space. I tried not to listen, but it was impossible. What do you mean they found her? His voice was cold, deadly. How did they get that information? A pause. No, absolutely not. She's off limits. Make that clear. Another pause, longer this time. I don't care what they want. The answer is no. My blood ran cold. They found her. Her. Me. Marco returned to the table, but his face was ashen, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. What's wrong? I asked, even though I already knew the answer would change everything. He sat down heavily, running both hands through his hair. When he looked at me, there was something broken in his eyes. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Emily, I need you to listen to me very carefully. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. I have enemies? People who would use anything against me to gain leverage. And somehow, they found out about you. The warehouse suddenly felt cold. What does that mean? It means they know your name, your address, where you work. It means they see you as my weakness, and they'll try to use that against me. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. It means I've put you in danger just by wanting you in my life. What kind of danger? The kind that... He stopped himself, closed his eyes. The kind where I can't guarantee your safety unless you stay away from me. The words hung between us like a death sentence. So that's it? My voice came out smaller than I wanted. We're done because your enemies found out about me? We're done because I can't live with myself if something happens to you because of me. He stood up, paced away, his hands and fists at his sides. I thought I could do this. I thought I could keep you separate from that part of my life. But I was fooling myself. There is no separation. Everything I touch gets tainted by what I am. Don't I get a say in this? He spun around, and there was anguish in his face. No, because you don't understand what these people are capable of. Because you still see the world as fundamentally good, and I can't let them take that from you. I won't. So you're making this decision for me, deciding what I can handle. I stood up too, anger replacing fear. You know what? That's exactly what everyone else in my life does. Decides what's good for me, what's safe for me, what I should want. And I'm tired of it. This isn't about control, Emily. This is about keeping you alive. And what about what I want? What if I decide you're worth the risk? Then you're making a mistake. His voice broke on the last word. You should run from me. You should change your number and move apartments and pretend you never sent that text. Because staying near me will only bring you pain. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry. You don't get to kiss me and tell me about your dead wife and bring me to your secret warehouse and then just decide I'm better off without you. You don't get to make me feel something real for the first time in years and then take it away because you're scared. I'm not scared. You're terrified, I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty space. You're terrified that you might actually care about me, that you might actually have something to lose again. So you're pushing me away before I can hurt you the way losing Lucia hurt you. The truth of my words hung in the air between us. Marco stared at me, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. You're right, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I am terrified, because the thought of them hurting you to get to me makes me want to burn the entire city down. Because I've already started imagining a life with you in it, and that's dangerous for both of us. Because I'm falling for you, Emily, and I don't know how to do that without destroying you in the process. Then let me make my own choice. I crossed to him, placed my hands on his chest. I could feel his heart racing beneath my palms. Let me decide if you're worth the risk. And if you're wrong, if they come for you, then you protect me. You said you would. With your last breath, you said. I looked up at him, willing him to see my certainty. I'm not running, Marco. Not from you, not from this. I spent 6 years playing it safe, and it got me nowhere. Maybe dangerous is exactly what I need. He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched him war with himself. The boss who'd learned to cut off anything that made him vulnerable. The man who'd loved and lost, and sworn never to risk it again. And the person underneath all of that who wanted so desperately to believe we could have something real. One condition, he finally said, his voice rough. You do exactly what I tell you when it comes to your safety. No arguments, no negotiations. If I say you stay inside, you stay inside. If I say you go somewhere with security, you go. Can you do that? Yes. And you tell me immediately if anything seems off. Someone following you, strange phone calls, anything. I will. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me so tightly I could barely breathe. His face buried in my hair, and I felt him shaking. I can't lose you, he whispered against my temple. I just found you, and I can't lose you. Then don't let them take me. I pulled back just enough to look at his face. Fight for this. Fight for us. And then I kissed him. Not gentle like I'd imagined our first kiss would be. Desperate, fierce, claiming. His hands came up to frame my face, and he kissed me back like I was air, and he was drowning. Like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. We broke apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. I'm going to make some changes, Marco said. Tighten security around you. Have people watching to make sure you're safe. You won't always see them, but they'll be there. Okay. And we're going to be more careful. No more spontaneous dinners. No more you traveling alone until I handle this situation. Handle it how? His eyes went cold again, and I saw the boss surface. However I need to. Let me worry about that part. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to ask what that meant. What handling it looked like in his world. But maybe it was better not to know. Maybe some things were better left in the shadows. Take me home, I said quietly. And tomorrow, we figure out how to make this work. He called Giovanni, and we drove back through the city in silence, his hand holding mine the entire way. When we pulled up outside my building, he walked me to the door. There'll be someone watching your building tonight, he said, And every night until I say otherwise. You won't see them, but they're there. You're safe, Emily. I promise. I know. He kissed me once more, soft and sweet this time, like a promise. Sleep well, Kara. Tomorrow we start figuring this out. I went upstairs, locked my door, and stood at the window looking down at the street. I couldn't see anyone, but I believed Marco. Someone was watching, protecting. I should have felt trapped, should have felt afraid, but instead, I felt strangely safe. I texted him, "Thank you for tonight, for being honest, for giving us a chance." His response came immediately. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay. Sleep well. Dream of me. M." I fell asleep with my phone in my hand. And I did dream of him. Of blue eyes and strong hands, and a future that felt impossible and necessary all at once. But at 3 a.m., my phone rang, jolting me awake. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, distorted, mechanical. "You should have walked away when you had the chance. Now you're part of this. And everything he loves eventually dies." The line went dead. I sat in the dark, my entire body shaking, the words echoing in my head. Everything he loves eventually dies. And I realized that loving Marco Valentini might be the most dangerous thing I'd ever done. Have you ever had to choose between safety and love? Between protecting yourself and fighting for something that might hurt you? Tell us what you chose and what happened. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay when everything tells us to run. I didn't call Marco. Not immediately. Instead, I sat in the dark of my apartment, my phone clutched in my shaking hands, replaying those words over and over. Everything he loves eventually dies. They wanted me to run, wanted me to be so terrified that I'd disappear from Marco's life and leave him isolated again, vulnerable again. And part of me, the rational, self-preserving part, wanted to do exactly that. Wanted to pack a bag, drive to Milwaukee, hide at my parents' house until this nightmare was over. But a stronger part, the part that had kissed Marco in that warehouse and felt more alive than I had in years, refused to give them that satisfaction. At 3:30 a.m., I finally called him. He answered on the first ring. "Emily? What's wrong?" Just hearing his voice steadied me. "I got a call. Someone with a distorted voice. They said..." My voice broke. "They said everything you love eventually dies." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, "Where are you?" "Home, in my apartment." "Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone but me. I'm coming now." "Marco, it's 3 a.m. I'm already in the car." I heard an engine roar to life in the background. 10 minutes. Stay on the phone with me." So I did. I stayed on the phone while he drove through the empty Chicago streets, his voice low and steady, talking about nothing important. The weather, the early morning traffic, anything to keep me grounded. I heard the urgency beneath his calm, the barely controlled fury. 8 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. "It's me, Kara." "Open up." I unlocked the 3 deadbolts I'd fastened after the call and pulled open the door. Marco stood there in the clothes he'd worn earlier, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, those blue eyes wild with something I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted fear. He stepped inside, pulled me into his arms, and just held me. His heart was racing against my cheek, his hands shaking slightly as they gripped my back. We stood there in my dark entryway, 2 people clinging to each other like lifelines, until our breathing finally synced. "I'm sorry," he said into my hair. "I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of." "It's not your fault." "It is. Everything about this is my fault." He pulled back, his hands framing my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. "They want to scare you away from me, and it would be smarter if you let them. If you walked away right now and never looked back." "Is that what you want?" "What I want and what's safe for you are two different things." "I didn't ask what was safe. I asked what you wanted." His jaw clenched, and I watched him struggle with the answer. Finally, "I want you to stay. God help me. I want you to stay more than I've wanted anything in 8 years. But then I'm staying." I said it firmly, with more confidence than I felt. "And we're going to figure this out together." Something shifted in his expression. Relief and fear and love all tangled together. "There's something I need to tell you about who's doing this." We moved to my couch, the same spot where I'd sent that fateful text less than 2 weeks ago. Marco sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at nothing. "There's a family, the Rossis. Old rivals going back 3 generations. My grandfather and theirs had a disagreement about territory. It's been manageable until recently. Their current boss, Luca Rossi, is young, ambitious, reckless. He wants to expand into areas my family controls, and I've been blocking him. And he found out about me. I should have been more careful, should have kept you hidden until I could neutralize the threat. But I was selfish. I wanted to see you, be with you, and I got careless." His hands clenched into fists. That call was a warning. Next time might not be. "So what do we do?" He looked at me then, and I saw the boss surface. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "I end this, tonight, before it escalates." "What does that mean?" "End it how?" "It means I'm going to have a conversation with Luca Rossi. A very clear conversation about what happens to people who threaten what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have scared me. Instead, it made me feel protected. Safe. "And then what?" "And then you're going to come stay at my estate for a while, just until things settle. I have security there, people I trust. You'll be safe." "I can't just leave my life, Marco. I have work, obligations. Call in sick, take a leave of absence. I don't care." His voice was steel. "This is non-negotiable, Emily. Either you come willingly, or I'll have Giovanni pack your bags and carry you there himself." I should have been angry at the high-handedness. But the desperation in his eyes killed any protest. He was terrified for me, and maybe, in this moment, letting him protect me was the bravest thing I could do. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll come." The relief that washed over his face was palpable. He pulled me close again, kissing my forehead, my cheeks, finally my lips. Soft and reverent, like I was something precious he was afraid of breaking. "Pack a bag," he murmured against my mouth. "Enough for a week. I'll wait." I packed quickly. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the essentials. Marco made phone calls while I moved through my apartment, his voice low and commanding as he issued orders to people whose names I didn't know. Security protocols, surveillance, a meeting arranged for later today with Luca Rossi. As I zipped up my bag, Marco appeared in my bedroom doorway. The pre-dawn light was starting to filter through my windows, painting everything in shades of gray and blue. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." The drive to Lake Forest was quiet. Marco held my hand the entire way. his thumb tracing absent patterns on my skin. Giovanni drove, and I noticed for the first time that there were 2 other cars following us. Security, protection, evidence that this was real, that the danger was real. But so was this, so was us. The estate looked different in the early morning light, softer, more welcoming. We went inside, and Marco led me upstairs to a bedroom that wasn't his, but was clearly meant for honored guests. Cream-colored walls, a massive bed with the softest linens I'd ever felt, windows overlooking the lake that was just starting to catch the sunrise. "Rest," Marco said, setting my bag on the bench at the foot of the bed. "You haven't slept. I have some things I need to handle. But I'll be back this afternoon." "Marco," I caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Be careful, please." He brought my hand to his lips, kissed my knuckles. "Always. I have something worth being careful for now." He left, and I heard voices downstairs, car doors, engines. I went to the window and watched 3 cars pull away, Marco in the center one. Watched until they disappeared down the long driveway, past the gates, into the city where he'd go do things I probably didn't want to know about. I should have been terrified. Should have been questioning every decision that had led me here. But instead, I crawled into that massive bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and fell asleep feeling safer than I had in my own apartment. I woke to afternoon light and voices downstairs. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The call, Marco arriving at my door, coming here, him leaving to handle things. I found fresh clothes laid out on the chair, designer labels, my exact size. Someone had clearly shopped for me while I slept. The thought should have been invasive, but instead, it felt like being cared for. I dressed and went downstairs, following the sound of voices to a study lined with books from floor to ceiling. Marco stood behind a massive desk, phone to his ear, and when he saw me in the doorway, his entire face transformed. He ended the call, mid-sentence. "You're awake." He crossed to me, pulled me into his arms, buried his face in my hair. "How do you feel?" "Like I slept for a year. What time is it?" "Almost 4. You needed it." He pulled back, studying my face. "Are you hungry?" "Maria made food." "Tell me what happened first, with Rossi." His expression hardened. "We had our conversation. He's been made to understand that you're protected, that touching you would be the last mistake he ever made." "And he agreed? Just like that?" "I provided some incentive for his cooperation. The details aren't important. What's important is that you're safe now, truly safe." I wanted to ask what kind of incentive, what threats had been made, what violence had been implied or promised. But maybe Marco was right. Maybe some details were better left unknown. "So what happens now?" I asked instead. "Now?" He smiled, and it was genuine, warm, the Marco I was falling for instead of the boss who'd just neutralized a threat. "Now we figure out how to do this, how to be together without the fear. How to build something real." "I want that. But Marco, I need to know, is it always going to be like this? Threats and danger and me hiding in your estate?" "No." He said it firmly. "What happened with Rossi was exceptional. Most of my life is actually quite boring. Business meetings, paperwork, family obligations. The violence, the danger, that's the exception, not the rule. And I'm working to make sure even those exceptions become rarer." "How?" He led me to the couch by the window, pulled me down beside him so we were facing the lake. The water was gray-blue and choppy, whitecaps visible even from this distance. I'm trying to legitimize as much of the family business as possible. Move away from the things that bring violence and toward things that don't. It won't happen overnight, but it's happening. For years, I had no reason to change anything. But now, he looked at me and his eyes were soft. Now I have a reason. I want to build a life where you don't have to be afraid, where we can be together without looking over our shoulders. That's going to take time. It will, which is why I need to know if you're willing to be patient, if you're willing to stay with me while I figure out how to be the man you deserve. I thought about my apartment in Lincoln Park, my job at the agency, my safe, predictable life. Thought about Jake and all the other insufficient men I'd dated because they were easy. Thought about 6 years of playing it careful and ending up lonely. Then I looked at Marco. This complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle man who cooked me dinner and told me about his mother, and looked at me like I was the answer to prayers he hadn't known he was saying. Who'd raced across the city at 3 a.m. because I was scared. Who was trying to change his entire world because I'd accidentally stumbled into it. I'm not going anywhere, I said, and I meant it. I chose this. I chose you. Even knowing what it means, especially knowing what it means. The kiss he gave me then was different from the others. Not desperate or claiming, but reverent. Grateful, like I'd given him something he'd thought was lost forever. I love you, he whispered against my lips. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Emily Parker. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. I love you too, even though you're terrifying and complicated and probably terrible for my blood pressure. He laughed, the sound warm and free, and pulled me onto his lap so I was straddling him, my hands on his shoulders, his on my waist. Marry me. I froze. What? Not now, not tomorrow, but someday, when you're ready, when I've proven I can give you the life you deserve, marry me. Be my wife. Let me wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. Let me cook you dinner and argue with you about whose turn it is to pick the movie and grow old watching the lake together. It was crazy. We'd known each other less than 2 weeks. By every rational measure, this was moving too fast, burning too hot, destined to crash and burn. But I didn't care about rational anymore. Yes, I breathed. Someday, when we're ready, yes. He kissed me again, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. It was heat and promise, and the beginning of everything. His hands slid into my hair, and I pressed closer, feeling his heartbeat against mine, knowing that my safe, careful life was gone forever, and I'd never been happier. 3 months later, I stood in the garden of Marco's estate, our estate now, watching the first snow of December fall onto the lake. I'd quit my job at the agency, started freelancing as a writer, working from home on the pieces I actually cared about, moved my things from Lincoln Park to Lake Forest, though we'd kept my apartment as a city place for when we wanted to be downtown. My parents had met Marco last month. My mother had been terrified until she'd watched him help her with her coat, pull out her chair, listen intently to her stories about my childhood. By the end of dinner, she'd been won over. My father had taken longer, pulling Marco aside for a conversation I wasn't privy to. But when they'd come back, Dad had shaken Marco's hand and said, "You hurt my daughter, and there's nowhere you can hide." Marco had simply replied, "If I hurt her, you won't have to find me. I'll turn myself in." Rachel had been shocked, then supportive, then mildly obsessed with the dramatic romance of it all. She'd made me promise to let her plan the eventual wedding. The Rossi situation had been handled quietly, permanently. I didn't ask for details, and Marco didn't offer them. But the threats had stopped, and I could move through the city freely again without a security detail shadowing my every move. Life with Marco was everything. He was attentive and passionate and surprisingly domestic. He cooked for me at least 3 times a week. We argued about politics and books and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. He taught me some Italian, and I was slowly learning to read the tattoos that covered his skin, each one a story he shared piece by piece. And at night, when we lay tangled together in the massive bed overlooking the lake, he'd tell me about his plans for the future, the legitimate businesses he was building, the charitable foundations he was expanding, the life he was creating where our children, someday, when we were ready, wouldn't have to carry the weight of the family name the way he had. "What are you thinking about?" Marco's voice came from behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "How one wrong number text changed my entire life." "Best mistake you ever made?" I turned in his arms, looking up at those crystal blue eyes that had terrified me 3 months ago and now felt like home. "Best accident that ever happened to me." "Not an accident," he murmured, kissing my forehead. "Fate. Remember? Some people are meant to find each other." "You really believe that?" "I didn't. But then you walked down those stairs even though you were terrified. And you stayed even when I gave you every reason to run. And you loved me even when it would have been easier not to." His hands came up to frame my face. "So yes, Kara, I believe in fate now. I believe in us." The snow fell around us, turning the world white and clean and new. And as Marco kissed me in the garden where we'd shared our first real conversation, I realized that my safe, careful life hadn't been living at all. It had been waiting for a wrong number text, waiting for 5 cars to pull up outside my building, waiting for crystal blue eyes to see me, really see me, and decide I was worth the risk. Waiting for love that was dangerous and beautiful and absolutely worth every moment of fear. 6 months later, on a June evening when the garden was in full bloom and the lake was calm as glass, Marco dropped to one knee in the exact spot where we'd stood in the snow. The ring he offered me had belonged to his mother, a simple sapphire the exact color of his eyes, surrounded by diamonds that caught the sunset. "I know I already asked," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But this time, I want to make it official. Emily Parker, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a man who's spent his entire life doing things he regrets, but has never regretted a single moment since the day you accidentally texted him?" Through happy tears, I said yes. And when we were married 3 months later in the garden, surrounded by his family and mine, by friends who'd watched us build something impossible and beautiful, by Giovanni, who cried through the entire ceremony, I thought about that Friday night in November, about the wine and the mistake and the terror and the choice, about how sometimes the wrong number is exactly the right one, about how sometimes dangerous is just another word for alive, about how sometimes the scariest thing we can do is stay when everything tells us to run. And I'd stayed. We'd both stayed. And we'd built something worth staying for. As Marco kissed me at the altar, his hands gentle on my face, his eyes full of love and promise and the future we were creating together, I heard him whisper against my lips, "Thank you for that text, Kara. Thank you for the mistake that brought you to me?" I whispered back, "Best wrong number I ever dialed." And somewhere in the universe, fate smiled. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and click on the next video. It is darker, deeper, and even more unforgettable. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story, and comment your country or city. Your support helps us create more contents like this.